Now let's listen to these guys together.
According to this organization's own projections, by the year 2050, more than 25% of the world's population is expected to come from the African continent. Additionally, by 2050, 1/3 of all young people aged between 15 to 24 will be residing on the African continent. So you see, the future of this world is African. Allow me to say this once again a little louder for those of you in the back. The future is African. Already today, Africa is a catalyst for human potential and development, as well as for economic reform and ecological stability. Africa is a catalyst for systemic change. If this reality, which is fact-based and straightforward, seems provocative or unsettling, perhaps it's because you are viewing it through the lens of centuries of filters, colonialism and imperialism, and the resulting implicit bias. Maybe you are unaware of the resilience of African nations or their remarkable ability to make a strong comeback just when you think it's safe to count them out. That is what is happening right now in my own country, Ghana.
All right, guys, that is Ghana's president right there at the just concluded United Nations General Assembly, reminding the whole world that the future is Africa. A very powerful statement. Yes, we will give him that. But here's the irony. Our presidents, they act so tough at UNGA, raising their voices as if to shake the world. Yet the biggest pity is this. Africans, including their presidents, don't realize that the United Nations was never formed with them in mind. Why not? Because when the UN was founded in 1945, Africa was still in chains. Out of the 51 original founding members, not a single sub-Saharan Africa country was represented. Most of our nations were still colonies, possessions of Britain, France, Belgium, Portugal. You know? Yeah. The Security Council, the permanent 5 powers, the ones who rule, all of it, this whole thing, this whole place was designed to serve those who already held global power. We were not even an afterthought. You cannot even say they had Africa in mind. No. The UN was built to secure peace among the powerful, not to deliver justice to the colonized. Right? But, as I said, the president reminded everyone that the future is Africa. But again, you have to ask yourself a very important question. If the future is Africa, why do we continue begging for our place and a seat at the table in these international forums? Why do we do that? But as I said, his speech was very celebrated, and I want to give him that. He stood tall and he went hard, and he reminded everyone that was watching that the future is Africa. So before we go any further and hear also what other presidents, such as Kenya's President Ruto, had to say, let's play more of Ghana's president, John Mahama, so that you guys can also get a glimpse of what his speech was about.
The most powerful post-World War II nations are still being rewarded with an almost totalitarian guardianship over the rest of the world. And yet, the first sentence in Chapter 2, Article 1 of the UN Charter declares that the organization is based on the principle of sovereign equality of all its members. If this were true, and was the case, a continent as large as Africa, with its numerous UN member states, would have at least one permanent seat on the Security Council. Furthermore, we believe that veto power should not be restricted to only 5 nations, nor should it be absolute. There must be a mechanism in this House for the General Assembly to challenge a veto. No single nation should be able to exercise an absolute veto to serve its own interests in a dispute. 30 years later, we African leaders are still making the same simple request for a permanent seat on the Security Council with the power of a veto. So today, Madam President, I stand here in this exact spot and ask the world, if not now, then when?
If not now, then when? I mean, look at it. We're in 2025. He's saying 30 years later. Some of you are not even born, and some of you who were born, you're just turning 30. So you can imagine, by the time you were born until now, you have African presidents standing in a forum begging for a seat at the table. Why? Why are you begging? Why? Why should Africa, the continent with the largest voting bloc in the UN General Assembly, still be begging? I mean, Africa has 54 states, more than any other region, and that's nearly 30% of the membership. But our numbers as Africans translate to almost no power, because the real authority rests with the Security Council, dominated by, them, US, Russia, China, Britain, and France. 5 countries are the ones who decide for the whole world. And Africa, guys, is a continent with 54 countries. All we do is provide soldiers for UN peacekeeping. We host UN missions. I think you heard reports that UN wants to also enlarge here in Nairobi. We contribute natural resources. But when it comes to decision making, we are very voiceless. And guys, we have to be plain about it. The UN is not Africa's savior. It is Africa's user. Look at how many billions in resources we contribute. They are often hidden in form of troops, land, and compliance. The UN sets up bases in our countries. They extract data, dictate reforms, yet they will never give Africa equal power in the system. What we are as Africans, we are the muscle, the manpower, the moral voice, but we are never the architects. And that is why every few years, an African president, such as Mr. John here, will stand up at UNGA to demand reforms, but only to go back home with nothing. Tough talk, but nothing. You are actually just talking tough, but you go home with absolutely nothing. And now, let's listen to Africa's spokesperson, Kenya's President William Ruto. One thing you'll be guaranteed: give Ruto an international forum, and this guy will go hard. He will even make you feel like you don't know anything. But again, still tough talk and nothing at play. But let's listen in to him and also hear what he had to say.
We are gathered for the UN at 80. The question is unavoidable. Is the United Nations relevant to the demands of our time? Can it continue to serve humanity in the face of current realities? Or has it become a relic of a bygone era?
Ruto, why are you asking us? You know the answer. Man, these are what we call rhetorics. These are questions where you are not even supposed to answer. But let's listen in to him. Let's continue.
Every institution, no matter how noble its origins or impactful its legacy, must adapt to changing times or slide into irrelevance. Today, the United Nations stands at a crossroads of renewal on one hand or decay on another.
I love that he knows. That. But let's continue. We are almost winding up with this speech. There's something very important I want you to listen to.
We would be denying the cold, hard truth if we say that the United Nations is delivering as it should. On peace and security, its voice is too often drowned by the rivalries of great powers, while some nations simply ignore its resolutions and do as they please. Too often, the UN's blue helmet, once a symbol of moral authority, no longer commands the same respect. From the conflicts in Gaza to Ukraine, to the crisis in Sudan, DRC Congo, Somalia, and the Sahel, we see actors proceed undeterred by the United Nations calls. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Kenya speaks from the experience of a nation deeply invested in multilateralism. For decades, we have placed our troops and police in harm's way for peacekeeping missions across Africa and beyond, from Somalia to Democratic Republic of Congo, from South Sudan to most recently in our neighborhood here in Haiti.
All right, that's Ruto right there. I mean, I don't want to repeat everything that he has just said. Mostly he talked about the UN institutions failing, about the reality of their collapse, and also he talked about how much resources we are using, especially when UN calls on African countries to come in. But here is the irony. African presidents, they will admit that the UN is failing, but they still plead with it to save them. How do you even go addressing something that you know is failing? This thing was not even curated with you in mind. You know, it's like acknowledging the walls are crumbling, but you continue to sit inside the house hoping not to be buried when everything comes crashing. Ruto points out how these institutions are outdated and powerless to address today's global crisis. From climate change to debt, you know, he spoke a lot. And he's right. But if Africa knows this, if the presidents know this, why not chart your own path? Why can you not build an African-led system instead of begging for reforms that will never come? I mean, what are we waiting for? What are we waiting for? But guys, I gotta go back to Ghana's president. One more clip, and then we continue with our conversation. Let's just hear what he had to say at this particular moment. He keeps talking about us negotiating for better deals, but let's hear him out.
Africa must exercise sovereignty over its natural resources to raise the necessary funds to ensure the well-being of its citizens. The days of parceling out vast concession areas to foreign interests for exploitation must come to an end. We'll continue to welcome foreign investment, but we must negotiate better for a bigger share of the natural resources that belong to us. And we must insist on value addition to these resources. We're tired of the continued image of poverty-stricken, disease-ridden rural communities living at the periphery of huge foreign-controlled natural resource concession areas. We're tired of having people extract the most they can from us and in return offer us the very least by way of respect, consideration, and dignity. We're tired of not being represented in ways that reveal the richness and complexity of our history or acknowledge all that we have overcome to arrive here in this liminal space of untold possibilities. Allow me to echo the Indian-American writer Arundhati Roy, who wrote, "Another world is not only possible, she's on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her briefing."
You can hear him there, you know, saying Africa must negotiate a better deal when it comes to our natural resources. And he's absolutely correct. I mean, for centuries, Africa has exported raw materials. We are talking about gold, cocoa, oil, cobalt, lithium, only to buy them back in processed form at 10 times the price. But the UN will not stop this. In fact, many of the trade rules enforced by the World Trade Organization, the IMF, and the World Bank, all institutions here, all these institutions, they are linked to or legitimized by the UN system. And they are also structured to keep Africa trapped in that role or that hole. Supply of cheap raw materials, you know, buyer of expensive finished goods. What are we doing? What are we doing? We are exporting and then buying 10 times. And unless Africa negotiates from a position of strength, nothing changes. And I don't know why we need the UN for this. You know, sometimes I look at this continent of ours, how beautiful it is, and I wonder, do you really need to stand at the UN to make a point? Why can't 54 of you come together and say, this is how we want to negotiate for our natural resources? You start the statement by saying Africa is the future. Absolutely. We are the most populated. That's a flex because we've been made to feel like our population is our weakness. But we must look at our population as a strength, manpower, brains. You know, it's a flex to know that Africa is actually the future. But it's not a flex when in 2025, you have African presidents standing there and talking about how, you know, when the UN needs resources, we are there. When this and this. I mean, if Ruto, the way he acts as if he's very intelligent, I mean, if you're that intelligent to know the UN is failing, why is Kenya still in it? Kenya and Ghana, obviously, they are also not alone. Several African presidents, they stood out during this year's UNGA. Take South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa. At this year's UNGA, he once again pressed the issue of reforming the United Nations. He called out the hypocrisy of a global order that talks endlessly about democracy, yet allows the UN Security Council to remain one of the most undemocratic institutions in existence, dominated by 5 permanent members with veto power. Ramaphosa went ahead even to remind the world that Africa's exclusion is not an accident. It is baked into the very design of the UN from its founding in 1945, when almost the entire continent was still under colonial rule. And why is he telling us things we know? Because we all know, unless the Security Council changes, the UN will remain a club of the powerful, not a platform for equality. So if someone is not giving you a seat at the table, why do you insist on being a member of that particular table? Then look at Namibia's new president, Netumbo Nandi, the country's first woman head of state, who was sworn in March 2025. In her early interventions at the UN, she carried forward Namibia's long struggle for justice, especially around the German genocide of the Herero and Nama people. She reminded the world that these crimes are not just history, they still shape Namibia's present. And her point was very sharp. Global institutions like the UN cannot continue to ignore Africa's calls for reparations and expect Africans to trust in empty promises. To her, justice means action, not polite words. But come on, Namibia, what are you waiting for? In your imagination, you still expect the UN to do something about the land that has been grabbed by Germans in your own country. You actually want UN's intervention. And we are talking about centuries of land injustices. And you are still waiting for the UN to come and talk to the German people nicely. Okay, let's go to another one, Uganda. Yeah, Yoweri Museveni did not take the stage at this year's UNGA, but his long-standing critique still hangs over these debates. For decades, he has pointed out the absurdity of Africa exporting raw coffee beans while Europe and the US capture the real wealth through their roasting, branding, and packaging. His warning has always been that Africa will remain poor until it takes control of the value chain. That same critique echoes in what leaders like Ghana's president said this year about negotiating better deals for Africa's natural resources. So, as we continue watching these clips, and as we continue seeing how Africa was represented during this year's UNGA, we must ask ourselves, should Africa keep begging for reforms from an institution that was never meant to serve us? By the way, that is like you being in a relationship with someone you know doesn't love you. But you are like, love me, love me, love me, you know. But you know this person doesn't love you and you are still in that relationship. And you still keep going and begging that person for intimacy, for advice, for love, for laughter. No, it is actually time that Africa stopped chasing validation and we start building our own table. A system that is rooted in our own numbers, our resources, and our values. Because these speeches will not save us. No, Ruto speaking like the spokesperson of the entire Africa will not save us. No matter how eloquent he is, he will not save this continent. Especially coming from a point where all these presidents, I think someone should actually, we should do a research on what does the UN have on Africa? What is this thing they hold on us that we are not able to come out of this thing? And we are very brainwashed about this union. By the way, until you start researching and seeing how bad Africa is represented in this space, you will always admire the UN. Actually, even when we were in school, majority of us, I'm not sure if you, or I know some people who really wanted to work in the UN. It's a flex being associated with the UN, the red plate, the red number plate. It's a flex. And I want to know, what is it that these people hold? What is this? There something Africa did we don't know? I don't know. Because something is not making sense that you have presidents who are representing some of the most amazing countries in this world standing there and saying, we know the UN is failing, but we are still begging. We need a seat at the table. No, we don't need these speeches anymore. What we need is action. Let me tell you what action could look like. Let us leave these international forums where Africa is treated like crap. We are always treated like a junior partner. Instead, we need to build institutions for Africans by Africans. Look at the Sahel countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger. They all walked away from the ICC. Actually, they are preparing to withdraw. And they are also daring to create their own Sahelian court. That is courage. I don't care what people say about the Sahel countries. I don't care whether some people, we're actually working on that soon, because some people have actually started saying Russia is the one forcing them to exit the ICC. I don't care what people say. That is courage. That is what we call sovereignty. Why can't the rest of Africa do the same with the UN? Why? Yeah, and I know we can't say we have the African Union, no. AU, by the way, was supposed to be that vehicle. It was supposed to be what would definitely replace the UN, but let's be honest, the AU has failed us. Too often, the AU mirrors the same bureaucracy and dependency we see in the UN. It's actually, they are just being comfortable and not doing anything to defend the African people. The AU, by the way, when you have African soldiers dying in coups, when our farmers lose their land to multinationals, you see how much land, by the way, we gave to this whole carbon credit thing, only for Trump to stand the other day and say this carbon is a scam. But it's always Africa who is at the forefront to even force our people to sign leases and pay them 250 shillings per year so you can collect carbon. Anyways, when you have our resources being plundered, the AU is very silent. I've never even heard the AU speak about this whole carbon credit nonsense in Africa. It is very silent. Or worse, it is there begging donors for funds. Guys, AU is not our liberation. AU is just here managing our captivity, and that's a fact. It is a fact. Actually, methinks AU was formed to make sure we never grow or advance. Methinks that. And if you have a different opinion, put it on the comment section. If the AU is working, let me know on the comment section. I stand guided. I stand to be corrected on that one. But here the real solution is, we have to stop outsourcing our dignity. We have to stop waiting for permission. We have to build our own regional courts, right? Continental parliaments, African financial system that answers to us, not Washington, the IMFs, or the Paris, or that whole, we have to be able to use our numbers to dictate global trade. We cannot continue begging for aid and yet have presidents who are proud that Africa is the future. How can we be the future if we continue begging for aid? Africa must actually become the author of its own destiny. We cannot continue being footnotes in someone else's speech. No. And Africa needs to realize power is never given, it's taken. You've seen what the veto states are doing. They took it and they said, we are the ones with this power. No matter how much you vote, one vote alone will make you all feel useless. We have to understand that power is never given, it is taken. These UNGA speeches will remain just that, speeches, where you have presidents shining in these speeches, carrying like 100 of their delegates, using our tax money to have people who are clapping for them in that forum. Just speeches, by the way, just an opportunity or a platform for these African presidents to look smart and sound smart. But they go home with no solutions. Actually, I think 2026, we need to keep tabs on what these same presidents are going to say during UNGA. They are not going to repeat these things. They are going to actually start by telling us, last time I came here, this is what I observed. These were the problems. And these are the solutions we recommended. And this is the progress. You can't continue giving us same speeches over and over, sounding smart there, being dressed down by people like Trump, you know, and then you come back home with nothing. So what solutions did Mahama or Ruto, Ramaphosa, what solutions did you bring from UNGA? No. We really need to start talking about this whole UN mess and start acting. The UN is not formed with us in mind. And I know that hurts, but that's the reality. I've seen a lot of Africans who are advocating for Africa as a continent to exit the UN. Please exit. Or start actually telling us, how are we benefiting? How are we benefiting as Nairobi, Kenya, by having UN offices here? Actually, the only way we benefit is that we have real estate in that particular place, blossoming. But who owns those houses? No, it's not even us. So how are we benefiting? We keep allocating them land for free, resources for free, so that people can see that Nairobi it's a UN destination. No, guys. These international things are not formed with us in mind. And we have to actually start acting. And I love the route that the Sahel countries are going. I want actually to see how that court looks like. I know there are a lot of people who are waiting for them to fail, but they are taking chances. They are taking risks. They are doing what they deem better for their own countries. But here you will still have these worn out people going and giving addresses in UNGA, telling us about how they know UNGA is failing, but doing nothing about it. No, that is not okay. These speeches are very beautiful. By the way, the moment you see your president giving a speech there, you are tempted to clap because of how eloquent this person is. But now when you go back and you listen to that speech, slowly by slowly, you realize this is a lot of nonsense. It's a lot of it. Nothing, zero. No, we can't continue saying that it's been 30 years and we've just been begging at a seat at the table. You can't honestly form your own table. African presidents can't come together and form. We are playing with Africa as a continent. And these people need to realize they are not going to be the ones talking on behalf of Africans in the next coming years. Young people are awakening. Young people will start actually doing their maths and realizing UN is more of a liability to us than an asset. UN is not an asset when it comes to Africa. It's not. And the young people are awakening. And they are realizing this. And the next time you have that assembly, you will have people actually calling you out on your own BS. Because next year, trust you me guys, these guys are still going and they are going to state the same things they've stated this year. And then they are going to walk all over New York, walking on the roads because of how safe New York is, and they can't even walk like that in their own countries. Yet you want a seat at the table. Even me, if I was the UN, I would not give you a seat. If you can't even make your own roads and you are busy catwalking in New York and you can't even make your own roads here in Kenya or wherever, why should I even consider you? Nah, nada. But let me know what your thoughts are. I love that the conversation around UN is happening. I actually saw a lot of people speaking about it, and us being able now to go back and ask ourselves, what are we doing in this place? What are we doing? No. No. Please. No. No. But let me know. I could be wrong, by the way. Me, sometimes I just come here and I say what's inside my heart. And what I've seen, people who are like-minded are actually also saying. But, I always welcome this conversation at the comment section. Tell me your views. If you think UN has benefited Africa, please let me know. I'm ready to come tomorrow and do a video of how Africa has benefited from the UN. Promise. I'm willing to come tomorrow and do a video on the benefits of the UN to Africa as a continent. I'm actually ready for that conversation. But till then, let me know what your views are on the comment section. And I just want to take this moment to welcome all the new subscribers that we have on the platform. I see you, I acknowledge you, I appreciate you. That is one thing I don't take for granted, that you guys walk this journey with us. Even when we're experimenting with different things, you are there holding our hand and telling us, let's see how far this goes. So I really do appreciate everyone that has subscribed. Welcome. And also feel free to share your thoughts on the comment section. Just a reminder, LNN has a very mature set of audience. So I don't think anyone is going to abuse anyone on the comment section. And if you do that, you're going to get blocked. Because we want to make sure that freedom of speech exists in that comment section. Respectfully, okay? All right, so that's it from me. And also thank you to everyone that is contributing towards independent journalism. I see you people playing with our MPESA. I don't take that for granted. Thank you so much for just donating towards independent journalism. So you can use our MPESA, number is right there. Our pay bill is right there. Or if you want to use PayPal, it's also right there. And if you want to use the Super Thanks category, it's also right there. So I really do appreciate the much support that we are getting from you guys, even financially. That is not something I take for granted. So I appreciate you. And if you happened to watch this from diaspora, remember our sponsors at TapTap. Use them to send money back home. You are going to get great rates. And if you use my promo code Lynn, remember you are going to get a bonus if it's your first time using TapTap. They're very fast, effective, and they also give you great rates once again. All right. So use TapTap and remember to always share your feedback with me on our sponsors. And I hope I see you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye.